You want to start recording?
We are recording.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. It's September 18th, and this is a special meeting of the Town Council. Our purpose of our special meeting tonight is something we call a primer regarding the master plan. And so we're going to begin with that. We presently do not have a quorum of the council present. We, however, can still hold this meeting. But as soon as we have a quorum of the council present, I will have to pause the meeting and call the meeting to order. We are allowed to do meetings virtually. You can either be in the room or you can be on Zoom or you can watch us on TV. And if there's any technical difficulties, we may have to stop the meeting, but generally that's not been the case. At this point, with regard to the special town council meeting, there is no change in the agenda. So with that, I'm going to greet Chris Brestrup, who is our Director of Planning for the town. And she is going to give us an update, if you will, or an overview, I think is a better way of saying it, of the master plan.
Good evening. My name is Chris Brestrup. I'm visible and people can hear me?
Yes.
So I'm here to give you a short presentation about the Amherst master plan, and then during the public forum to hear questions and concerns from the public about the master plan. But first, I'd just like to say a few words in general. A master plan is a dynamic, long-term planning document that provides a conceptual framework to guide future growth and development. It's not the same as zoning, and it doesn't deal with streetscapes and how wide the sidewalk should be or where to plant trees. And it doesn't tell us what style of architecture we should have. And it doesn't talk about parking spaces, how many we need. It's much more general than that. To accompany our master plan and to support its goals and objectives, we have a series of other plans that map out details for us, including our zoning bylaw. And since the master plan was completed in 2010, we've made many other plans, which can be incorporated into the master plan by a vote. And to list a few of them are the sewer extension plan, housing production plan, housing market study, the transportation plan, the open space and recreation plan, which is going to be updated pretty soon, the bicycle and pedestrian network plan, community field master plan, and the climate action, adaptation, and resiliency plan. We've also made changes to our zoning bylaw since the adoption of the master plan, including in
Chris,
2021.
I need to ask you to pause for a moment. We now have a quorum of the council. Okay, so given that we have a quorum of the council, I'm going to call the town council to order on September 18th at 5:34. And I'm going to quickly make sure that people can hear us and we can hear them. Shalini Balmilne is not present yet. Pat DeAngelis?
Present.
Anna Devlin Gothier?
Present.
Lynn Griesmer is present. Mandy Johanneke is not present yet. Anika Lopes is not present yet. Michelle Miller is not present yet. Dorothy Pam?
Here.
Pam Rooney?
Here.
Kathy Shane is not present yet. Andy Steinberg?
Present.
And Jennifer Taub?
Present.
Alicia Walker is not present yet. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 7 of us present. Please. Thanks, Chris.
Certainly. So anyway, I was saying we've made changes to our zoning bylaw since the adoption of the master plan. And in 2021, we made 7 changes to our zoning bylaw. That was quite a record. We've recently adopted zoning amendments to make it easier to build an accessory dwelling unit on your residential property, and also easier to open a restaurant. We've adopted a new set of flood maps and a zoning bylaw to accompany them. And we're currently working on a solar bylaw that will become part of our zoning bylaw. It will regulate how large-scale solar installations are permitted. So the master plan that we'll talk about tonight was created over a period of 12 years from 1998 to 2010. And since we had not previously had a master plan, it took a long time to develop one. The town should start the process to have a new master plan around 2025 with a goal of having a master plan adopted by town council in 2030. And we hope it won't take 12 years this time. We don't have a 12 years between now and 2030. Meanwhile, we should continue working on implementing the master plan, and we'll talk about that later, including continuing to create new plans to accompany the master plan to address issues that are important to the town. So now let's talk about the master plan. And if Athena would bring the PowerPoint presentation up, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so I've given this presentation a few times. It's changed a little over the years, but here we are, Amherst Master Plan, Planning Amherst Together, 2006 to 2010, and we're now on September 18th of 2023. So the master plan has served us well over the last 13 years. Next slide, please. So what's in a master plan? A master plan is a community's general long-term blueprint for its future. It's a dynamic document, the beginning, not the end of a process. Next slide, please. A master plan is required by Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 81D. And our master plan, in accordance with state law, was adopted by the Planning Board in February of 2010. And in accordance with the charter, it was adopted by Town Council in November of 2020. The Amherst Home Rule Charter requires the adoption of a new master plan by Town Council every 20 years. So as I stated previously, 2030 would be our target date for a new master plan. So it's worthwhile to consider beginning that process in 2025. Next slide, please. This master plan was the first in Amherst for nearly 40 years, and it was based on extensive public input. You can see the picture of people gathered at the high school cafeteria, all giving their input to the consultants on the master plan. In addition to public input, the master plan was also based on research on the community's existing conditions and anticipated trends for the future. Of course, the existing conditions have changed a little since the master plan was created. So this master plan represents Amherst's best effort to balance competing interests of a diverse population. And our population is quite diverse in terms of age, in terms of income, education, race, many things. Next slide, please. The master plan really began, or the effort towards the master plan really began in 1971, when UMass was growing very rapidly and there was a lot of development in town, and people thought that there was a need for some sort of comprehensive planning. So the Select Committee on Goals was established, and they produced a report which includes this conceptual plan over to the right here in gray and white. And it shows really the kind of the same plan that we have on paper for the master plan that we currently have. So it shows the downtown area in the rectangle in the middle of this town, and it shows two circles to the north. One is the North Amherst Village Center, and the other one is Cushman Village. Obviously, Cushman Village is not as big and as developed as the North Amherst Village Center. Then down to the south, there are again two circles. One is the one to the left is the Pomeroy Village Center. The one to the right is the South Amherst Institutional Village Center or Village, with the church, the school, and the library. And then up to the east, there's a little circle that was the Gatehouse Road Village Center, which hasn't really developed very much. There is a lot of housing there, and there are some offices, but initially it had a little store, and I think there were plans for it to develop into more of a village center, but it hasn't yet done that. And then in the south is the Atkins Corner Village Center, where Applewood is located, Hampshire College, and of course, Atkins Farm Market. So in 1997, the town and the Comprehensive Planning Committee hired Walt Kudnahowski's consulting firm. He is a landscape architect who started the Conway School of Landscape Architecture, and the town worked with him and his company for about a year and developed the Amherst Visions. And again, Amherst Visions document is available on the town website along with the SCOG report. The Comprehensive Planning Committee started meeting regularly around the time that the Amherst Visions process was completed. And they met for a period of 6 years to work on how to plan to proceed with the process of planning Amherst together. And planning Amherst together was the title given to the master plan process. There was substantial participation from the colleges and the university, and $20,000 was appropriated in 2004 to hire a consultant to establish a scope of work and a cost estimate for the work of the Planning Amherst Together group. Many community members were involved, including Bruce Coldham, who is currently on the planning board. He was on the planning board back then. John Kuhn, who's a retired architect in town, but he's still doing some work. Cheryl Zoll, who was the Amherst Survival Center director. Alyssa Brewer, who was very prominent. She was a town meeting member, a select board member, and then a town council member. And Aaron Hayden, who was the chair of the planning board, and also he was on the select board. Eric Nakajima was the chair of the Comprehensive Planning Committee, and Jim Wald and many others. Some of you may have participated in that effort. In 2005, town meeting voted $65,000 for the master plan. Next slide, please. So in 2006, Amherst Planning Amherst Together hired a consultant, ACP, who was based in Ohio and New York, and with engagement and support of the Comprehensive Planning Committee, they proceeded to do their work. And town meeting voted an additional $135,000. So we had a total of $200,000 for this effort. Data was gathered, and Planning Amherst Together held public idea gatherings and group workshops, and a community survey was sent out to over 600 households. And I think my husband received one and answered it. I didn't have any part in that. I'm not supposed to have part in that. Anyway, then we produced the first draft to the master plan. In 2008, 2010, the master plan subcommittee of the planning board edited the draft. And then finally in 2010, they held a public forum and voted to adopt the master plan in February of 2010. Then 10 years later, after the adoption of the charter, the town council also voted to adopt the master plan. Next slide, please. So the master plan contains chapters on the following topics that are required by Mass General Law. The first one being goals and policies, then land use, demographics and housing, economic development, natural and cultural resources, open space and recreation, services and facilities, transportation and circulation, and implementation. Next slide, please. So the master plan is organized. In the beginning, there's a statement of key directions for the community. And some of those key directions are to maintain Amherst's existing community character, to provide housing that meets the needs of all residents while minimizing impacts on the environment. And this is a tough one that we've really been wrestling with. To diversify and expand the economic base, and to promote an ethic of sustainable environmental energy practices in all town activities. And we did have the CARP report that was produced by ECAC, Energy and Climate Action Committee, I think is what their actual name is. And we now have a director of sustainability, Stephanie Ciccarello, and we're very glad to welcome her as a departmental director and to help her to support her work on sustainability. Next slide, please. In terms of some of the chapters in the master plan, land use is, of course, my favorite one. And we have many objectives under land use, but these are some of the objectives that we have. To direct future development to existing built up areas. And that's something that we've really been pretty successful in doing. So the village centers and the downtown have absorbed much of our recent development. Preserve key undeveloped lands, and we do have a lot of land that is under conservation restrictions, both some privately owned land that has conservation restrictions and some publicly owned land. Protect key farmland and farming, and we take great effort to do this. We have a lot of land that has agricultural preservation restrictions on it, and much of it is in the Northeast Street and Southeast Street corridor. And if you look towards the east, you can see quite a bit of preserved land. There is some on the west as well. Guide new housing growth while minimizing impact on open space. So we do have a cluster zoning amendment or zoning bylaw that encourages the use of the cluster zoning development method, which means that you put your infrastructure and your houses in a smaller location and you get some dimensional waivers as a result, and then you preserve a larger piece of land. An example of this would be the Vista Terrace development in South Amherst, which is 11 acres of land, 4 of which were developed for housing and 7 of which are preserved. And I believe that the developer has either given it to the town already or has the intention of giving it to the town. And then another objective is to honor historic and cultural character and beauty of the neighborhoods. So we have a historical commission and a local historic district commission, and both of them work on this objective. We have 3 local historic districts that are preserved, and the local historic district commission takes its work very seriously in reviewing changes that are occurring there. And I believe that that commission is also investigating the possibility of creating another district. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. Demographics and housing. So the objectives here are encourage a greater mix of housing types, sizes, and prices, serving a wider range of income levels. This is something that is very challenging to do because, as you know, land prices in Amherst are high, and developers have an incentive to build expensive houses as a result, so that they can get their payback from buying the expensive land. But we do have this as kind of a front and center issue that we are working on a daily basis. Preserve and expand the number of affordable and moderately priced rental units and housing stock. And this is something that we've been successful in regard to affordable housing, not as successful with regard to moderately priced housing. So that's something that we really need to put an effort into going forward. Encourage production of housing in an environmentally sound manner. And we do have the stretch code that we adopted as part of our building code. So the stretch code does, promote that housing be built in an environmentally sound manner. But we also have some of these newer buildings that are going up are very environmentally sound, that they really have a lot of insulation, and they're all electric. And so they're actually, if not LEED certified, they could be LEED certified. I think most, if not all of them. And then improve housing and services for people who are homeless. So we've done a lot of work with Craig's Doors to address this issue. We also recently purchased the VFW site, which we're hoping to create a shelter for homeless people, as well as potentially some affordable housing there. Next slide, please.
Chris, I'm just going to ask you to pause for 1 minute. We're having a problem with the projector in here and I need to reboot. So we're going to lose your audio for just a moment. Please bear
Okay.
with me.
All right.
Please go ahead, Chris. That didn't seem to resolve it.
It didn't resolve?
No, but we can still see you on our individual monitors. It's just the display in the town room isn't working at the moment.
I see.
We'll
I
try and
only have
resolve
10
that in
minutes.
between the next meeting.
So anyway, the master plan has a lot to say with regard to natural and cultural resources. And I realized last time I gave this presentation, I really didn't have much in the way of cultural resources on display here. So I included the Emily Dickinson House. So some of the objectives are promote the preservation, appreciation, and sustainable use of our historical and cultural resources. And we do have a lot of really beautiful old historic buildings. The Emily Dickinson homestead is probably the most prominent. And we, Amherst College, we're fortunate that Amherst College owns the building and takes it seriously to preserve it. They've also done a lot of restoration on it recently, and it really is quite beautiful. In terms of cultural resources, we also have the Amherst Cultural District. So that also is helpful in preserving and promoting our other cultural resources and applying principles of environmental sustainability town-wide. Well, on the left here, we see the Holyoke Range, which is in a large part preserved by the DCR, Mass Department of Conservation and Recreation. Also, I think here in the foreground, if I'm not mistaken, this is Amherst College land, but I may be mistaken about that, and Dave Zoma could correct me. But it is very important to the town to preserve this kind of land and landscape. And then on the right-hand side, you see the Kern Center at Hampshire College, which is a living building challenge building. And it is, for the most part, if not entirely, self-sustaining with regard to heating and water and lights and all of that. Next slide, please. In terms of transportation and circulation, the master plan asks us to actively promote alternative modes of transportation. So we do have a very great bike share program, which unfortunately this year wasn't able to operate due to problems with the company that operated it. But we're working with the other towns and cities around us to reactivate that for next year. But in terms of other things, we also have a determined effort to include multi-use paths as well as bike lanes when we do roadway work. And the DPW is very good at that. Right now, we have worked with the Mass DOT to redesign the area between the center of town and University Drive, and that is just being completed, and that will include a multi-use path. And I believe it will include bike lanes as well. So that's a good way of promoting alternative modes of transportation. Implementation, providing sufficient resources to implement a master plan. Well, the select board had an intention to establish an implementation committee. It did have a, what do you call it, a charge that was created and approved by the select board, but then the committee was never populated. So we have been implementing the master plan all along. Doug Marshall, who is the chair of the planning board, and I took quite a while to go through the implementation matrix that's included in the master plan. And we did note all of the things that we had accomplished as of 2020 and made notes about who was responsible for those. So if anybody wants to see that matrix, I'd be happy to share it. But I just wanted to say that we are, we have an ongoing effort to implement the master plan, and then require concurrence with the master plan. And whenever we adopt a new zoning amendment, we state at the end that it concurs with the master plan. Next slide, please. Guess I better talk fast. We only have 5 minutes. So what have we accomplished, and talk about implementing the master plan's objectives and strategies. Next slide, please. So in terms of affordable housing, we have several things that have been completed, including Olympia Oaks in North Amherst, Main Street housing in the center part of Amherst, and then the Valley CDC is just now applying for a comprehensive permit to develop 30 units of affordable homeownership in the Ball Lane and Pulpit Hill neighborhood in North Amherst, and we're very excited about that. Next slide, please. So how do we get affordable housing? We preserve existing units as we did at Rolling Green, where the town contributed $1.2 million to preserving those units in a joint effort with Beacon Communities. We have developer-driven affordable housing. Beacon Communities has developed the North Square at the Mill District. Habitat for Humanity developed small sites around town. Valley CDC has recently completed the work at Northampton Road, and they're starting their Ball Lane project. The town also has, in the last several years, made improvements to the inclusionary zoning section of the bylaw, which have encouraged private developers to include affordable units in their developments. So the town role is really multifaceted. It's working on the zoning bylaw to encourage affordable housing, to act as a facilitator with developers and the state and consultants to put together projects that could be approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals, funding through the CPA, Community Preservation Act funds, and tax incentives, and helping developers to find grants where those are appropriate, permitting, and land. We also purchase land and then offer it to developers to develop affordable housing, which we're doing now with Belchertown Road and East Street school sites. And also eventually we'll probably do something similar with the VFW site. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of recently completed projects: North Square at the Mill District, Aspen Heights, One University Drive, and East Gables, which is just now going online. And that's the project on Northampton Road that we've all been watching go up over the past year or two. Next slide, please. We work closely with the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, and we've been very grateful to the chairs of the trust recently, and also to John Hornick, who worked very closely and very forcefully to promote affordable housing over the last several years. Next slide, please. We're continuing to work on things that are addressed in the master plan to address homelessness and the need for more affordable housing. I've mentioned these two projects: repair aging infrastructure by repairing roads, bridges, and sidewalks, constructing new sidewalks. We have a new sidewalk on East Hadley Road, on Mill Lane, and recently the DPW completed a sidewalk along Amity Street, which is really quite nice. Refining a plan to address our 4 large capital projects. We're moving ahead quite well with the library and the school. We need to put some attention to the fire station and DPW, so those are all challenges. Updating the zoning and general bylaw, which we have done recently through the preservation of historically significant buildings, ADUs, and the flood mapping bylaw, and then applying the principles of environmental sustainability townwide, which include the stretch building code, net zero for municipal buildings, and the solar bylaw working group. Next slide, please. Oh, we're at the end. So I made it in a half hour. Thank you.
Excellent timing. Thank you. So that concludes our quote primer, and we are going to go immediately, because it is 6 o'clock, into our public forum. The charter requires that we do a public forum every year on the master plan. This is an opportunity for residents to make comments, to ask questions, and we try to be a little more informal during this time period. We're not going to do the presentation again because just about everybody who is presently in the audience was here for most of that, and so there's no reason to do it again. I do want to, however, officially call the September 18th, 2023 special meeting of the Town Council for the purposes of public forum to address the master plan. And I mentioned earlier, open meeting law allows us to meet both remotely and in person. And this meeting is accessible in real time by Zoom, by phone, and as a live broadcast on Amherst Media Channel 9 and on their live stream. We have a quorum of the council present. I've already checked with all of the counselors who have been here, but I'm not going to now check to make sure that Mandy Johanneke can hear us and we can hear her.
Present.
Okay, thank you. With that, oh, I'm sorry. Anika, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Thank you. And is there anybody else I missed? Okay. Other counselors will be joining us at a later time. So what I'd like to do at this point is just point out, this is the second meeting. We're using Zoom link for all of the meetings. There's no change. This is in fact our required public forum. Let me just state, public forums are an opportunity for the public to give us feedback, for us to be alert to what the public is thinking about in upcoming issues, and to collect feedback from the public. And Chris mentioned earlier that their recommendation is that in 2025, we begin the process of updating or redoing or doing anew our master plan. And because we have to, as required by the state, have a master plan in place by 2030. So if you're physically in the room, I want to make sure that you have signed in with Athena if you would like to make public comment. And if you are in the audience, I just want to mention there are 8 people on the Zoom audience. I'm sure there's others as well. If you are in the audience and you would like to make public comment, please raise your hand. Meantime, I'm going to ask Shalini Baumilne if she can hear us and we can hear her.
Present, yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for being alert to that. So we have 3 people in the audience that have their hands raised at this point and 1 person in the room. So with that, I'm going to ask Athena to start with Meg Gage.
Meg, please come to the microphone and state your name and address before you make your comment.
And make sure that the button is on. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Hello, everybody. I'm Meg Gage. I live at 208 Montague Road, and I really appreciate this chance to talk with you about the master plan, which I totally support, and encourage all of us together to figure out ways to implement it. Planning is one of those things that happens and sometimes then gets put on the shelf, like tick, we did it, and then you go ahead and problem solve without applying some of the master plan goals to how you define problems and how you approach them. The North Amherst District 1 Neighborhood Association, or DONA, convened a master plan study group a year ago in order to take the excellent master plan and figure out how could it best be applied to District 1. And we actually expanded it to think of North Amherst. Our district, the way that we go into Cushman, sort of, but not the store. So we took an approach of the whole of North Amherst. The project was led by by Michelle Miller, one of our 2 spectacular District 1 counselors. And she did a really terrific job of leadership and pulling people together. 15 people participated in about 10 hours of meetings. And I have copies for everybody. You received this last year, but it's funny, we say we want to send things electronically, so we don't have all that paper, but we have so much electronically that we don't actually read that much of it. So you put it by your bed. And I won't go through the details of it now, but we found the master plan was a good participatory tool in order for us to think about North Amherst, particularly the village center concept, and how to make the village centers, which is so much a heart of what the plan is about, more vibrant, more alive, and how to take some of the goals of the plan and apply them district-wide. So for example, one of the things we suggest is having a participatory process for each of the village centers to design village design guidelines for each specific village center. I think there's 6, and they're really different from each other. So they would have different goals, different design features. And this could be participatory so that neighborhoods could do this and think about things like bike paths and housing and so on. There's so much more to say about it, but I'm trying not to talk. Is it 3 minutes, right? Did I just do the 3 minutes?
You're fine.
Okay.
Do you even have another 25
Okay. No, there's 3
seconds?
Oh, seconds. There's another plan, again, to remind you something, these are plans for which people have spent hundreds of hours and they are approved. So let's use these as a way of bringing people together to identify where we need to work together, what our goals are. And it also is a way of problem identification. Sometimes I think we're disagreeing because we haven't agreed on what the problems are. Okay, so now my time is really up. And the other, just one last sentence, the other plan that's been approved, it's fantastic. Nobody even talks about it, is the Amherst Bicycle and Pedestrian Network Plan. It blends with the master plan really well, and I hope people will become familiar with both of these plans. Thank you very much. I appreciate the
Okay.
public comment. I'm going to give you a chance to have one.
Thanks for joining us and for coming actually to the town room. Carol Lewis, please enter the room, state your name and where you live.
Oh, I am in the room. What do you know? Can you hear me?
We can.
Carol Lewis, I live at 21 Ward Street. I just have a question of curiosity more than anything else, actually. I noticed that Chris said that she and Doug have worked on this a whole lot, but the implementation plan called for kind of an implementation committee or something or other, and that was never populated. And I was just wondering about the story sort of why that happened or whatever. And the only other thing I'd say is I really thought all the stuff Meg just said was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, there didn't seem to be interest on the part of the planning board members to populate it, and the select board, I don't know what happened on their end about, recruiting people to be on the committee. So we did present it to the planning board as a something that they could do to participate in the town government, and they were not. None of them volunteered to be on that, and it could be that they were already on subcommittees and they just couldn't handle anymore. And then the select board didn't seem to move forward with it either. So I don't really know more than that.
Thank you. Janet Keller, please enter the room, state your name and where you live.
So, can you hear me?
We can.
Yay. Okay, I'm Janet Keller and I live at 120 Pulpit Hill Road up in beautiful North Amherst. I want to say how wonderful I think the master plan is, and that it reflects the quality of the input that from the public as well as elected and appointed officials that participated in it. It's a terrific plan. And I especially would like to see going forward that zoning specifically refer to the wonderful maps that we have that show what the land is underneath where development will go, and be very mindful and strategic in directing it to places that are already designated as village centers, and some places like University Drive that are not designated as village centers, but more recently, we've said that's a good place for development to go. I think that is really important because it can direct development to places where it will function best and avoid places where it will incur expenses for new roads, water and sewer lines in outlying areas, and maybe intrude on farms and forests that we want to and need to preserve, or places like wetlands and floodplains. And that's all I have to say about that. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us, Janet. Carol, Kairo, please enter the room, state your full name and where you live.
Hi, my name is Cairo Serna. I live at 160 Clark Hill Road here in Amherst. I'm here as a member of the Democratic State Committee. And I also have a question about the master plan, specifically about housing. I was just wondering, is there anything in the plan that would help deal with or prevent prices from increasing in the existing privatized housing? Because we do know that private entities are buying up housing for the purpose of renting to students. And this is a threat both to Amherst residents who will be pushed out and struggle to navigate the market, and also to students who will be at risk of predatory pricing due to a lack of options. So we do need some sort of measures to prevent this exploitation of Amherst's housing. And even if we build more housing, not only is this going to take time to mitigate these issues, but it's not going to entirely prevent Amherst from slowly becoming more hostile to the people who live here. And I was just wondering, is there anything in the master plan that is like intending to deal with that?
Chris.
I would say that the master plan doesn't really deal with that, but the CRC has been working very closely with the building commissioner on establishing a new rental registration bylaw that does deal with some of those issues. It helps to regulate rental properties and inspect rental properties to the extent that developers are really held, or not developers, but landowners, landlords are held to a higher standard than they have maybe been in the past. So I think that this will help. But the master plan doesn't really have details addressing your issue.
Are there other people who would like to make public comment? Janet, you still have your hand up. I don't know whether. Okay, thank you. I'm going to leave the forum open for a little bit, although we have met the requirement of 50% of the time being available for the public to speak. That's a requirement in our charter. And that's one of the reasons we do the primer as a separate meeting. So if there's anybody else in the audience who would like to make a comment, please raise your hand. Athena, I think it would be useful to prepare a slide that says the special meeting of the Town Council and School Committee will convene at 6:30 on this Zoom link. And that may give you time to see if you can reboot the screens in the room. So I'm seeing Martha Hanner's hand up. Please enter the room, state your name and where you live.
Martha Hanner. I live at 18 Alyssum Drive in South Amherst. I just wanted to say that I remember back when the master plan was being debated and participating in public discussions. And I really thought that that was an excellent process of involving the public. And so I would hope that going forward, when we have other subjects for public involvement, that people will remember that extensive process and really make good efforts to involve the public participation in some of our future discussions of issues here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Martha. Are there any other comments that people would like to make with regard to the master plan? Questions, comments? Dorothy, you have your hand up,
Are we allowed to speak?
please.
Okay. I really enjoyed the report, but I noticed that there is nothing that has been made recently or in the works that when my husband and I were young, living on $7,000 a year and had 2.5 children, get on the way to 3, but would not qualify for the official affordable. Okay, there is no modestly priced housing for families anywhere that's being built. And I think that is really a very serious lack. And I don't know how to do it, but I'm just saying that I think that's the big gap that we have now. And not just for young families, but for people who work at the universities, people who don't qualify for the government subsidized affordable housing, but cannot pay the prices that are being charged now. That's it.
Thank you. Kathy, I want to make sure that you can hear us and we can hear you. And note that you joined us for this part of the meeting.
I am here. Thanks.
Thank you. Jennifer Taub?
Yes, if it's okay, I did want to respond to something that was said.
Sure.
Regarding, we're seeing kind of a proliferation of investors purchasing homes and renting them out at very high prices. And I just wanted to respond that, I'm a member of CRC, and I think we did a terrific job of updating and revising the residential rental property bylaw, but we did not address, and it does need to be addressed, that concern that a member of the public brought about seeing, losing homes that were starter homes and homes for families and other households. We're losing that to investors, and that is not addressed. It just wasn't part of the purview of the residential rental property bylaw revisions, but it's something that should definitely be on our list of items to address.
Kathy Shane?
I'll just weigh in on this same thread. For those of you who've been reading the Gazette, you'll see this is a regional issue, not just an Amherst issue. Our existing housing stock is being driven up in price as investors buy it, and the cost of building a new house has escalated. I found it interesting. It might have been this weekend's paper, the New York Times, said this is increasingly a national issue, particularly around any university town, because investors have discovered that housing is a terrific new place to speculate. So they're snapping up houses often before they go on the market for cash, which outcompetes someone who needs to get a mortgage. They just bypass it. So, I think it is a really big issue, and it may require us to think regionally and statewide, not just at the local level.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to make a comment? Julian Hines, please enter the room, state your name and where you live. Chris, I'll come back.
Hi, can you all hear me?
We can.
Thank you. My name is Julian Hines. I live at 41 Pine Grove here in Amherst, and I was sort of wondering, expanding on what's been said about the master plan rightfully points out about moderately priced homes, homes for people who might make too much to qualify for capital A affordable housing, but not enough to afford some of the median home prices here that are around $500,000. So I think what I'm wondering of both the council and the planning department is, what are we doing to do our part in addressing the national issue of investors and other corporate entities outpricing families who are looking to buy here, contribute to the tax base, have their kids in the schools, etc. And in addition to that, I'm sort of wondering how we could get ahead of the curve in our region. Currently, our neighbors who are experiencing similar issues in Pelham and Belchertown have implemented first-time homebuyer subsidies and grants, which Amherst, I don't believe, has any at this point. And I'm thinking that that might be an area the council can explore, and it might allow average families to be more competitive in the market compared to investment firms. And my other question is, I'd like us to look at maybe exploring creating certain areas of town where these investment firms are not allowed to purchase homes, and that it is reserved for single families and families who can't afford to compete with these investment firms, talking about people who work at the universities, people who work for the town, people who work in the schools, etc. So yeah, thank you for hearing my concerns today.
Julian, thanks for joining us. Chris, you had your hand up earlier, and perhaps you want to fold into this a response to the most recent comment.
Yes, I wanted to say that the town planning department and others in town, including town council members, have been attending the International Town Gown Association meetings, which are focused on this particular problem, particularly for university towns and college towns. And we are also doing our own research on this problem. It's a difficult problem, and there don't seem to be any, clear, perfectly fine ways of coping with it, but we will continue to explore the issues. And the planning board is meeting the 27th of September and the 25th of October, and possibly at the end of November, to discuss how to create more housing opportunities in Amherst. And so it's certainly a topic that is, being explored. The other thing I wanted to say was, I believe, in regard to the first-time home buyer program, I think that Valley CDC does have a first-time home buyer program, and frequently you'll see flyers around town hall advertising it. And I think there are grants or subsidies up to $50,000 for first-time home buyers. I don't know the details about that, but I believe that Valley CDC would have those details.
Thank you. Are there any final comments before we close the forum? Seeing none, then I'm going to adjourn the forum. The council meeting will resume at 6:30, which is what time it's posted for. Meantime, don't be alarmed, because Athena is trying to get the screens in our room to work, and that takes a reboot. So for counselors, you have a break until 6:30. Please unmute your mics. Also, put your picture on. In other words, don't show your video. And please be back for 6:30. Thank you.